Let's be real, if you're still killing people for God, you're just someone who likes murdering people. Religion Analysis by Aaron Michael O'Neill, March 13, 2030. Through early integration and internalization of a particular religion's prescriptions and proscriptions, many followers develop an empowerment, interpretation of human behavior, and explanation for mystery. Christianity began as a cult, survived the death of its leader, and today this universal religion exists in 114 countries. Luton, 2030. Christianity has distinct beliefs, memberships, rituals, and a principle of loving thy neighbor, which aligns with the other great religions, and the assumption that followers will tolerate others. Although broken into denominations of Catholicism, evangelism, and other Protestant sects, the persistence of Christianity is a successful pattern of colonialism. Luton, 2013. Religious colonialism governs complete influence over the subordinate nation, with zero tolerance toward opposing systems of belief. Taylor, 2010. Due to integration and socialization of faith at early ages, faith is difficult to change. Therefore, methods of reconciliation are often by force. This forced cohesion breeds from the practice of intolerance, ignoring the potential to live in harmony with those refusing to accept the way of Christianity. Do humanitarian rights dispense with the inheritance of a faith that preaches acceptance? Despite patterns of intolerance and acts of contradiction that become transparently terrorizing over time? Professor Shirley Jackson Case's dedication to uncovering the social origin of Christianity, focusing on how ancient civilizations permeated with supernatural agencies, offers an apologetic thesis clarifying religion as merely an inheritance. Stott, 1930. Long before Christ, ailments in ancient times were not natural, but set down to the action of demons. Beliefs formed to protect society, as access to protection exists through vast systems of sacred symbols, rituals, and beliefs. Case suggests how menaces found in the ancient mind remain in the modern society, as shown in the question, how to obtain freedom in the face of terrible forces which beset us on every side. Scott, 1930, p. 96. Case closes his theory of Christianity's creation, affected by primitive myths and prophecies, where God grew from society's need for ultimate reason. Scott, 1930. A modern sociologist, Kenneth Weshues, offers modern understandings of how faith protects a society against the human condition, so permeated with anxiety and uncertainty. Luton, 2013. The compelling question is why religion is a mere inheritance. What function do these supernatural agencies have on the uncertainty within a society? Emil Durkheim dedicated his sociological perspective to understanding religion, analyzing the ritual theory, self-worship, and associated the term collective effervescence to the empowering attributes of religion. Greeley, 1995. He argues that sacred rituals strengthen and renew the membership and level of sacredness for symbols that represent the group. Summers-Effler, 2004. Durkheim's understanding of ritual theories illustrates the role in establishing cultural foundations, and its preceding consequence on social interaction. Summers-Effler, 2004. He argues that the concerted energy from rituals can be the function to orchestrate uniform solidarity. Teven, 2011. Collective effervescence can exude superhuman strength. In a circular fashion, as harmonious empowerment results in further cohesion and continued strength, similar to soldiers entering battle. Teven, 2011. This energy has the capacity to arouse boundaries, whereas threats toward empowerment stimulate defensive coping mechanisms. Summers-Effler, 2004. With greater rhythmic interaction and consistency, members' intolerance in the presence of concepts that conflict with their unified belief can exude with collective effervescence, leading to adverse effects on those challenging their system. With a misinterpreted message, increased solidarity can negatively affect others. Durkheim studied how energy released during ritualistic worship begins as a society that learns to worship itself and is instinctive to intensified cohesion. Greeley, 1995. Later, sociological discoveries expose the macro patterns of social life that correspond to self-worship and the different rituals of Christianity. Summers Effler, 2004. A modern sociologist, America Bella, compares Christianity to the civil religion in America to Durkheim's self-worship principle. The symbols and beliefs of their civil religion, intensive cohesion and self-worship, all sanctify the American way of life. Luton, 2030. A society that worships itself is a society that contains itself and maintains social order. Sometimes this collective energy fuels intolerance toward lifestyles, specifically actions that the Bible shuns. Christianity associates punishment to violations as one's pathway to hell, a place of eternal suffering. The Christian faith persists through efforts made by social institutions, such as government, family, and church. However, the fear of supernatural agencies is most instrumental for society's adherence to faith and a given set of norms. For an undisclosed period, Christians used fear of eternal suffering to justify religious makeovers for other denominations of Christianity and non-Christians. Taylor, 2010. Lamarquand, 2013. Grant Lamarquand, 2030, is the area bishop for the Horn of Africa. Writing on the power of the final judgment, he finds that religiosity and ritual attendance decreases as sermons lack focus on the biblical imagery of hell. The pattern of fear associated with the loss of eternal happiness sets the base for social stability and control. The bishop exposes how Christianity uses its superstitious belief to inhibit deep-rooted archetypal and cultural symbols of evil into the minds of society. Lamarquand, 2030, p. 99. It is a hegemonic power of fear once held together through the efforts of missionaries, ignoring political and cultural boundaries, spreading the narrow explanations of life and death, and the potential of eternal suffering. Andrews, 2010. Edward Andrews, 2010, editor for the Journal of Church and State, reflects on divisions made by scholars examining Christian missionaries in two ways, separated by an era marked by industrialization, civil rights, free education, and anti-colonialism. Missionaries were once messengers of God, graceful martyrs. More recently, however, they saturate with annotations of rapacious imperialistic force. A pre-industrial missionary provides one example of how Christianity powered over subordinated faiths. Philippe Quack studied under Anglican missionaries in England for 10 years after being taken at a very young age from his native African country. Ordained a missionary by the Church of England in 1766, Quack became one of many Africans Christianizing other Africans. He composed hundreds of letters during his participation in colonizing his own country, despite the transparent hypocrisies he witnessed in his Anglican ministers. Quack noted how Christians that trained him were only concerned with gain, which contradicted their scriptures. He was trained in the spiritual battle against the superstitious fetishes, which Christians saw in his native African customs. Andrews, 2010, p. 669. During this time, Christian followers ridiculed Africans for their idolatrous system of belief, practicing voodoo and having fetishes that lean toward evil. Reflecting on Opake's letters, he compares how the Bible is a fetish in itself. When a modern missionary explains how the fetishes within society are evil, the response remains the same as pre-industrial claims, and the Bible takes responsibility for their actions. A paradigm for this agentic shift reflects in a Canadian missionary. Bill Watcott, charged of hate crimes in 2005, was convicted and subsequently released from the responsibility of his actions as of February 2013. Maclean's, 2013. After a long appeal with the Supreme Court of Canada, the Freedom of Speech Act became clearer for missionaries. Although some words can group to form hateful speeches, the freedom to spread Christianity and its system of beliefs is not a crime. A week after his victory, Walcott handed out graphic signs at Regina University with a hard-hitting hate speech. Leader, 2013. This begs the question, if the government passed a law to refuse society the right to spread the word of Christianity, would the fundamental excuse for controlling social order with respect to institutions like family, education, and media weaken? On the contrary, if Walcott suffers for his Christian free speech, would it not invite international attention? Perhaps this law could put Canada in the spotlight for intolerance toward religion. How do humanitarian rights overcome the succession of intolerance with a zero-tolerance policy? Furthermore, how does childhood exposure to Christians' morals acceptance lead to acts of bigotry later? The Bible permeates with love and tolerance. However, institutions in a society can skew this message. In modern societies, it begins with the family. Scott Myers, 1996, used a unique model to estimate the effects of family influence that can determine an offspring's magnitude of religiosity, and which factors encourage the inheritance of Christianity. The study consists of interviews with 471 parents in 1980, and the subsequent follow-up with their adult offspring in 1992. The greatest variables include the quality of a child's relationship to their parents, family structure, and magnitude of each parent's religiosity. To define religiosity, sociologists grade followers based on these 8 dimensions. One's acceptance of supernatural experiences, ritualistic participation, level of devotion, agreeability with the faith's doctrine, comprehension of one's faith, how consequential their religion is on everyday life, level of community integration, and the degree of particularistic notion that Christianity is the only road to salvation. Results show how religious persistence relies on a generation's success to indoctrinate its offspring. Myers, 1996. Parental structure and marital happiness have tremendous effect on the delivery of Christianity's message. If quality in these variables decrease, an offspring's religiosity decreases. If an uneducated, unemployed mother reproduces children with an educated, employed father, it increases offspring religiosity, although the reverse of these gender roles decrease it. When both parents rate high in religiosity, it may weaken the relationship with their children, with variables of generation gaps, and the intolerance toward lifestyles prohibited in the Bible. The intuition of family and primary socialization are quite traditional powers at developing systems of belief. Myers, 1996, also found that religiosity was determined to be greater for conservative Christians opposed to more liberal ones. Historically, political powers have had a strong influence on society. Perhaps without their imperialistic qualities, Christianity would not be so universal today. The overwhelming evidence of Christian conversion is succeeded through a form of cultural imperialism. Andrews, 2010, reflects on institutions taking children from their non-Christian family, resocializing their offspring with Christian names, and empowering them through the collective effervescence. This act of Christianization divided societies that were once rich with tradition, each having unique survival skills and social arrangements. Luton, 2013. Indigenous inhabitants of Africa, South and North America, and parts of Asia ruled under this type of imperialism. Once a generation is converted, it enters the family, and the socialization continues. In modern Christian societies, the political power does not exist beyond challenge. However, the elite reproduces culture through the military, academia, and the media. Hunter, 2009. To compensate for weak hegemonic power, the instrumentalities used by governments loosely order social life, and their cultural commitment. Hunter, 2009. The President of the United States, an evangelist, uses national television to preach, "If you're not with us, you're against us," while referring conflict between Christian-based America and the Islamic terrorists. Maloney, 2002, p. 1. The media is perhaps the most effective modern sermon acting on society. preaching uniform messages to increase the collective worship. Media distributes in the interest of the elites, very similar to the delivery of Christian belief. Both are instrumental of a marginalized dissent, which is how one highlights selected voices that result in individual gain. Luton, 2013. Karl Marx theorized this religious perspective, which ties the messages and purpose of Christianity to the economic base of society. Greeley, 2010. Christianity is instrumental for controlling wealth and pacifies the oppressed with illusions of eternal happiness in exchange for material loss. Greeley, 2010. He explains how the elite use all institutions within a society to achieve greater power over the society. Wealth, power, and prestige remain greatest when distributed to a limited percentage of people, making this group very influential on society. Marx demonstrated sympathy for Christianity, for its manifestation to control human essence with an illusionary happiness. Foster, 2008. Marx explains how the oppressive force of religion acts like an opiate for the masses, through promising heaven after death. Greeley, 1995. Modern sociologists make connections on how Christianity assisted in the long-term oppression of African Americans in the Deep South through the illusionary rewards for good subordinate behavior. Luton, 2030. For decades, African Americans never rose up from slavery and discrimination. The collective effervescence and rituals offered an escape from the torment of society, as faith in heaven contained their explosive behavior. Ironically, their white Christian neighbors fanned the flames of intolerance. The meta-analysis by Daniel Batson, 1999, offers a response to the contradictions of Christianity, through comparing research on how the level of Christianity results in aversions to help or associate with members of an outgroup. To Christianity, members of an outgroup may include different races, sexual orientation, ethnicities, or faiths. To rate the level of Christianity, Batson, 1999, used Alport's, 1966, extrinsic versus intrinsic orientation, a method that compares if an individual uses religion instrumentally or intrinsically as a central part of their existence. Batson, 1999, surveyed 90 undergraduate Christians, asked about their willingness to help a member of their own group donate to homosexual pride and help a homosexual visit his ailing grandmother. The results show that the majority of Christians became less willing to help after learning that the recipient was a member of an outgroup, often feeling no need to justify their choice. Batson, 1999. All participants who explained their choice described it as a moral stand for equality. To make it clear, Christians who justify their discrimination use the principle of equality. It seems that these good Christians follow the concept of loving thy neighbor. However, each Christian defines the term neighbor differently. Batson, 1999, finds that Christians inherently want to help others until it violates their faith. Similar to Baton's study, Regnerus et al., 1999, compared Christians' willingness to help the poor, with results showing the majority wanting to help some of the time. Street-level assistants greatly reduced their willingness to help, while most refused to even associate with a member of society living on the street. This study exposed an overall negative response toward the poor by participants, exuding intolerance yet unwillingness to help unless donations filter through well-known Christian institutions. Conclusively, a collective intolerance exists in many aspects of Christianity, a system shown to be a mere inheritance. Records share millennia of supernatural agencies acting control over Christians, with consistency and acting contrary to the principle of loving thy neighbor. Despite the universal need for love and equality by the majority, why do followers of Jesus Christ ignore his message? Love your enemies, and do good to those who hate you. For even sinners love those who love them. New Jerusalem Bible, Luke 6:27, 32. If the faith preaches kindness which results in the opposite, what is its purpose? Christianity repeatedly undergoes structural transformation. The question is whether another restructure solves intolerance, when its entire persistence is a result of inequality, oppression, and the inheritance of supernatural agencies created from a civilization permeated with the uncertainty of the first century.